All right, Zig coming in on the top 10 of the show. We have Jeff Tripoli, a drummer extraordinaire. He reached out through Andrew Toy, and this was a really fun conversation. He's got an album out called Wabi Sabi, based on the philosophy Wabi Sabi. We'll get into that into the conversation. This was a fun drummer talk. We got a song to play at the top. It's a bit longer, so I'm going to jump right into it. Here's Evening Sun off Wabi Sabi. Jeff Tripoli. Dig. Evening Sun, Jeff Tripoli. The album is Wabi Sabi, available now on all streaming platforms. After listening to that, you probably heard some sounds that were unfamiliar. And Jeff, during the process of making this record, invented a lot of his own instruments to have an individual voice. And that's part of what makes this record so interesting and charming is like this is 100% Jeff and his voice. And that's hard to do with any creative endeavor. Before we get into it, the top half of this interview, like maybe the first few minutes, are going to sound very strange compared to any other podcast I've put out. And part of that is I lost half that interview, and we had to use the backup file, which is recorded in a way that's not as easy to mix. So a few minutes in, it gets to be a different tonality, and that's why. But what Jeff says is still prominent, still meaningful and impactful. It just it's got a different tone. Anyway, friends, before we get into it, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on one of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests and sharing their insights with you. And here we go. This is my conversation with Jeff. But awesome, Jeff. Hey, man, thanks so much for reaching out.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I think I found you did a quote, I think, for Andrew Toy.
Yeah. Andrew's awesome.
Yeah, I know Andrew. He used to play in a Celtic band that my Celtic band used to tour with those guys. And he's a great drummer too, man.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how I found out about you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. When I talked with him, he had a whole Celtic band, and I found that interesting with you too. And like, I think there's something so rhythmically compelling about Celtic music that dominates everything about that music. Like this whole like 6/8 feel and how like the melodies are composed and like the idea of jigs, you know?
Yeah, jigs and reels. Yeah, absolutely, man.
How'd you because you, as we were talking, you were driving back from your band's last show, and it was your Celtic band, right?
Yeah, we're called the Town Pants.
The Town Pants.
Yeah.
So why is it the last gig? What's
Well, a little bit of history about the band. It's run by two brothers named David and Dwayne Keogh.
Okay.
And they've been doing it for 25 years. I've only been in the band for the last 6 years. So, touring takes its toll. And there was a mixture of, people having a little bit of health issues and stuff like that. So it was, it was about time for those guys. Needless to say, I'm not done. I'm not retiring, but it's simply just another chapter closing in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, there's also our fiddle player, Johanna Stowe. She's putting out her own solo record, and I'm doing my own solo records, as you know. So we've all got things going on. It's not like, we're kind of like angry at each other or anything like that. It's quite the opposite. We all had a really great retirement little party last night. So, it's bittersweet. Oh, right on.
Okay. So that's cool that it's like a friendly resolve. It's just, you know what I mean? Like, and that's, the tour that like intensely, and with that type of music, like the venues I imagine you play are very specific, kind of like clubs and stuff.
We do mostly Irish festivals, Celtic festivals. Okay. Yeah, we would travel around Canada. We'd be going all over the States. And we've actually made trips out to Ireland and Scotland. We actually have a week tour of Scotland coming up. So that's going to be the actual closing. But as far as like the shows go, for official shows, that was the last one that we played last night. So when we tour Scotland, it's sort of like you're on the tour bus with the fans and the band, and we're all hanging out, and we stop at all the places along the tour and like jam in the pubs and stuff like that. So there's not like an official stage and a PA system and a drum set. It's just more like if you were to think of like a tourist kind of tour company setting it up so that you actually go on a tour of Scotland, like if you're a tourist, but they cater to bands so that the band gets their fans to sign up. And one year we went to Ireland, we had about 75 people sign up to come with us. And it was pretty incredible. Like the one gig we had, because we were out there for about a week, the one gig we did have that was an official gig on a stage with a drum set and a PA system, we looked around the room between songs and I saw all of our fans from, well, at this point, they're family, but from Hawaii to Chicago to New York to Ottawa and up to New Brunswick. I mean, we've got people all over the place. So it's really bittersweet to see it close, but all good things come to an end.
Right, right. But what a cool way to kind of not because it's one thing to learn a music and study it and play it and incorporate it into your vocabulary, but to dive into the culture like that and to be in it. Like you're playing on the pub floor. You're not playing that's as real deal as it gets. So fully understand and immerse yourself in that music. I can't think of a more real way to do it than what you described.
Yeah, there is no other way to do it, really. The funny thing is I don't have a drop of Celtic blood in my system. I'm Italian. I'm upstate Italian, but so I can't quite keep up with most of them there. But the Irish culture is so inviting, and it's such a rich culture, especially with music and history as well. There's a lot to tell, and it's a great culture. But now's the time for me to move on, find new projects, and I've got my own drum record that I've put out, which is my second release, and a whole bunch of collaborations with other drummers, and hopefully Andrew Toy will be a collaboration coming up in the future.
Very cool.
And I owe a lot to my mentor. His name's Butch Norton, and he's the drummer with Lucinda Williams currently, and was the drummer for the Eels back in the 90s, if you can remember those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Novocaine for the Soul was that song they had.
That was a great, but that whole record, that was a great record.
Yeah, Beautiful Freak, great record, man.
I think the Eels, he just put out his 14th record or something, 14th album.
He's still going.
Yeah,
he's still going. And I talk to Butch on a regular basis, and I'm not sure if he hinted at it, but he's definitely still talking to those guys. So, and recent, I think. I can't say for sure what he's been talking about, but I know he's still really well connected with a lot of people. Butch Norton, he's my mentor, and he's really opened me up to a lot of ways to practice creativity and how to be a solid drummer, and a really great leadership he has. But also just the fact that with different drummers coming in to collaborate, it's a whole new kind of music. It really doesn't have a specific genre, unless you call it maybe world music or something like that. But it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what the genre is. And that's what I think is so creative and interesting about it. A lot of it's what I'm doing is improvised as well. So
right. So for everyone who's listening, we're talking about Wabi Sabi and rhythm changes. What are Butch's ways to practice creativity that inspired you? How did and how did you meet Butch?
I met Butch pretty much the same way I meet a lot of folks. Just like yourself, I just do my research and I reach out with an email, and the people that get back to me, I start building relationships with them. And with Butch, I had just been releasing my first record, which was a pandemic release. It was, everybody got off the road, touring stops. So rather than sit around and watch Seinfeld all day, which I did, but I just decided to record my own record and just experiment with it. And that came out right after the pandemic. Well, pretty much after, when things started getting back to normal. And from there, I just reached out for other drummers that were making drum-only albums. Not like a jazz drummer doing solos, but drummer-only albums. So I went on to drummerworldforum.com, and I put it up there, who's doing this? And somebody got back to me and said, look up Butch Norton. So I did, and he has a project he has called La Prima Lingua, and that was done with himself and another drummer who was, they call themselves AKA Butch Jerome. So that's Butch Norton, and Michael Jerome is the drummer with Better Than Ezra. And they put together a drummer only album called La Prima Lingua, and I got into it, and I was just like, oh, maybe I should try to contact Butch. And I did, and I didn't realize who he was until he called me on the phone out of the blue. And I said to my fiance, Justine, I said, there's this guy, Butch Norton. He's the drummer with the Eels. And she's like, really? You don't remember the Eels? I'm like, oh, that's Butch? I'm like, oh, okay. And, he's a very personal guy. Like, he's very easy to talk to, very chill, very nice guy. He's the humblest dude ever. And I've also reached out to other people in regards to drummers like Rich Manjicaro, and people would know him from his days of playing with Glenn Fry and Joe Walsh. He was also an A&R representative for Pisces Cymbals and is now the A&R representative for Gong Bop's Percussion. And really sweet guy. He did a podcast with Butch and himself and this drummer who I also reached out to and got in touch with, Adam Topol. And Adam's the drummer with Jack Johnson. And the three of them were, the three of them were on a podcast together. And then all of a sudden, Rich Manjicaro brought up the fact that he went to Syracuse University, which is the city that I'm from. And I didn't know he was from Syracuse. So I reached out to him. And it turns out we went to the same junior high school.
Huh.
So there's a lot of, there's a very small world out there.
Right.
And so the way that I meet Butch and meet all these people is just by reaching out,
Yeah.
And hopefully people return the call.
I think that, to reach out to someone with genuine interest in the craft and or even just to share genuine joy for the craft, or actual wanting to find insight. I think someone who's really into what they do, if it's drums or if it's writing or whatever, sees that guidance role that they can kind of supply a little bit if they have the time and the will to do so. And those are the guys
Absolutely.
those are the guys that really are the real deal, and you can tell that means as much for them as doing the thing and letting that inspire.
You said it. Yeah, right there. Butch gets as much of it out of us as we do out of him, if not more, It's a great thing. And drummers love to talk shop. Drummers are very, very, we all stick together. So it's a great group to be a part of. And I couldn't ask for more, but yeah, hopefully I'm going to have a lot more collaborations coming up on my next record, which is, still non-existent because I haven't started recording yet, but waiting for things to die down with the Town Pants before I move into that world, which I'll be doing that pretty soon.
That's awesome. So to kind of dive in, what were some of Butch's creative exercises that you kind of or ways to practice creativity that he shared with you?
Yeah, he's got this. The first thing that I was doing with him was taking any old song, any old tune, and try to play it as many different ways as possible. So I'll do one take with whatever comes to mind. Pretty much whatever would come to mind would be like a straightforward beat, and I do that one take, and then I go back and then try to play a completely different group over the same song and do that as a second take. And then do a third take, which is a completely different group. And then once I got used to doing different takes on one song, he would say, okay, now do this beat verbatim, which means play it exactly as it is. Then once you get that take, go over and play a second group that will go on top of that to accompany it. And then go back and play a third group that will embellish that. So you're actually constructing parts that work interlocking with each other, sort of that way. And other things about practicing creativity, like he's got his contraption kit, which is his agitator Bowron drum, which is an agitator from a washer dryer machine.
Huh. Yeah.
And a Bowron drum on top.
It's a Celtic drum, right?
Yep. Yeah. But he doesn't play it like Celtic. He plays it differently. He puts it on top of the agitator and sort of plays it like it's hard to describe, kind of like a hand drum, you know. And things like found sounds, putting tin cans on the drums. I do something where I take like a bicycle hanging rack frame that you put on your wall to hang a bicycle in your garage. I put it on top of the cymbal, so I just get all these different sounds from experimenting, using bottle caps as shell shakers, using making my own instruments, which I did on Wabi Sabi. And that, however, making my own instrument was definitely sparked by Butch, but really heavily influenced by this composer that I've gotten into named Harry Parch.
Hmm. The guy who was like he was kind of like all over the place, right? He was kind of like a nomad in a way, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
He was a train jumping hobo during the Depression era. So he was born in 1901, really early 20th century guy. And he was doing things like creating his own instruments and using microtonal scales, which was really new to me, especially as a drummer. I don't usually work with scales.
Right.
And to give some of your listeners an idea of what a microtonal scale is, for those that might not know, a usual musician would play in an octave of 8 notes. So going from G to G is 8 notes. But going to G in Harry Parch's microtonal scale was 43 notes.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No. Like, it's interesting because, you know, that's like the whole like Eastern, like the fretless instruments, and the idea of just like mathematically, the idea of like, all right, this is an inch apart. Well, how many centimeters? Well, how many you know, you can keep dividing that ratio, which makes pitch. And like, it's interesting because like our ears, like when you tamp, like do you play any other instruments other than like percussion instruments? Do you mess around with? Imagine like you would have to have dealt with like piano if you went to any type of schooling, but
I actually started off playing guitar as a kid.
Okay.
Yep, my father and my uncle were guitar players, and my great uncle was also a Hawaiian steel guitar player. So at my grandparents' house, there were acoustic guitars hanging around, and my father's electric guitar, and I picked it up and I toyed around with it. But when I was 10 years old, my friend Greg Phillip and I were really bored, and we were like, "Oh, let's start a band." And now this is 1993, and I was like, "Oh, I'll play guitar because I already have a guitar. I got my father's guitar." I was like, "No, I want to play guitar." So that was the end of my guitar career. And I started playing drums, and that was 1993. But I've also taken 2 years of music theory in high school, so I worked a little bit with piano, and I also do some backup singing, and I've done quite a bit of that in the past. Not so much recently, but I do a little bit of singing as well. And you know, I toy around a little bit with bass guitar, but not really anything outside of drums and percussion.
So like, with the idea of like a pitched instrument, like you get so used to the Western set of like chromatic notes, and if there's anything in between, it just sounds disorienting in a bit. The lack of resolve, you know.
And I think it's because we've sort of been put into a box like this is the correct way to play.
Right.
But the reason behind Harry Parch's use of the microtonal scale, from what I understand from my research, which I still have a lot of research left to do, is that it's supposed to mimic the human voice. And now, if the human voice talked in key, it would sound really funny, and we don't talk like that naturally as humans. So we talk like this, and the notes go up if you have a question, and they go down when you make a statement. And, you know, so that's the idea behind why I wanted to have something like that on my record with Wabi Sabi, was because there were no lyrics. There are no singing parts. So I needed something to sort of fill that spot. And what I did was I created something I called the hammer slide, which
I
is
saw
basically
that in your video. The can,
oh,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I took a wooden shelf, like a piece of wood, and butchered my dad's old electric guitar and took the tuning knobs off of it so that I could string wires across it and tune it. And I sort of strike it with like a pencil or mini drumsticks, and I use a side of an old cymbal stand as a slide piece, like a lap steel guitar. So it's kind of a cross between a hammer dulcimer and a slide guitar, and it's really fun. And it takes the place kind of the human voice, so it fills that spot for the listener. And of other things, I've used like mixing bowls with marbles, and I just spin the marbles in the mixing bowl. It sounds like crickets. Interesting stuff. And the coolest thing about it is not only am I being creative, but it's my own voice, and nobody else has those instruments but me. So it's completely unique.
Right, right. And it's cool because like when I was listening, because I listened to the record like maybe 3 or 4 times to get ready to talk with you. And I was trying to figure out like what am I hearing? And like I'm hearing like it sounds like rulers being bent in at different positions to get different pitches. But when I watched the video, I was like, oh, that checks out. I hear that now. Like,
Yeah,
but
cool.
it's cool because like certain things like just in the proximity of regular life are really tonally interesting as percussion instruments. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
just to,
absolutely.
like slap a pot or slap like a light fixture like on the wall with like no switches, you get a cool sound there. And
Oh, yeah.
it's like the equivalent to a writer hearing a passerby say a phrase, or or like the photographer seeing a still in something happening and capturing that moment. Like all these little
Yeah,
things are like
absolutely. The
very
world is your instrument.
right. Yeah, well said. But
Yeah, and it's fun because it's if you're able to really know where to find ways to get inspired, if you know like how to get inspired by certain things, it's difficult to understand. But the way that like the feel of a certain kind of dance makes a drummer want to play a certain way.
yeah.
Or another great example is how Billy Kreutzmann and Mickey Hart, the Rhythm Devils from the Grateful Dead, would do the Apocalypse Now soundtrack. And they did that by watching the movie and playing along with it. And they would get inspired by the film.
Right.
So there's all different ways to be inspired. And especially, like you said, with the passerby saying a simple phrase, and then the next thing you know, that's a song.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's cool. Like I've never like I find myself like banging on stuff all the time, being like, that sounds cool, But I've never
Oh,
really
yeah.
equated it to the percussion like version of that, like Inspirato nugget. Um so
Yeah,
like
and it's a great thing, man. The world's your instrument.
right, no, that's beautiful. I remember listening to a French singer songwriter and like said something along those lines. Lori
Oh, very cool. I'll
Lori
have to check that out.
I'll send it to you. I can't remember her name at the moment. But like
Cool.
and like she's got this interview video and she's just slamming on everything singing like and like but I remember at that moment being like, "Oh, that's right." And I haven't thought about that until this conversation. I was like, "You're right."
Another great example is the drummer from Wilco, Glenn Cochi.
Yeah.
He has taken the whole idea of what we're talking about to like the next level, which would be, I mean, you just have to check him out. Obviously he's done great work with Wilco, but his side project is, he's got this thing where he creates a new groove every day or something like that, a new beat a week.
Okay.
New beat a week, yeah. And you got to check out Glenn Cochi too. He's one of those guys, truly one of the greatest drummers of our time.
Was it just even to have the practice of coming up with something every week and just putting it there and being like, that's that,
Yeah, it's the discipline of putting yourself into the lab.
Right.
Go down and make Frankenstein alive every night or every day.
So like, okay, so you start this band with your friend. He kicks you off guitar. You're in the drum world now. What's the gap where drums become this obsessive like thing that drives you to go all into this Celtic band? You know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah.
Because that's a big, as a teenager, like, yeah, you want to play this really cool, fun, like world music, and most it's not Nirvana. I'm not into that. You know what I mean? Like,
well, it's funny you mentioned Nirvana. The reason I am a drummer today is probably, well, let me back up a little bit. Most musicians that we know of all were inspired when the Beatles played Ed Sullivan.
Right.
Next thing you know, everybody's buying drums or buying guitars or want to write songs. My Beatles moment, quote unquote, was Nirvana Live and Loud on MTV in 1993. Specifically the song Radio Friendly Unit Shifter. And at that moment, I was like, I want to do that. And I never looked back. I was just some kid, and I didn't really have anything else in life. I mean, I had great parents, I had a really great upbringing, but drums were the only thing that never like let me down. And the way that I got from playing in bands in seventh grade, we're doing REM and Radiohead stuff, to playing with the Celtic band is a really long journey. But most of it has to do with a certain festival out here in upstate New York is called the Great Blue Heron Festival. And I kind of call it my crossroads. I've played in like 4 different bands at this festival over the span of, I think, 18 years. And the Town Pants were the band that I just retired from. The Town Pants at the time, before I actually knew who they were the headliners of these festivals and became really good friends of mine. And next thing I know, I'm playing in my own bands and we're opening up for the Town Pants. And they're asking me to join the band, but I couldn't join because I had already gotten into a new band. And I was sort of like already jumping on one speeding train going the opposite direction. To jump onto the other speeding train wouldn't make sense. But I knew them and I knew their music for quite some time. And then stars aligned and things opened up and I asked them, hey, you guys still need a drummer? And we connected that way. So it worked out with the festival being the crossroad kind of thing. I never expected or had any like idea that I would be playing specifically mostly in the Americana folk scene. I always wanted to be, you know, Nirvana, bash my brains out and stuff like that. And but to find myself playing in that market, I think has a lot to do with where I live. In upstate New York, there's a lot of traditional sort of well, not traditional, but there's bluegrass inspired music. There's a lot of reggae. There's a lot of Zydeco. There's a lot of jam bands. Grateful Dead is a big influence out here. So I found my way into that group of people that I just really thought were most like me. And a lot of them were, you know, playing kind of folk music or bluegrass and really interesting Americana stuff. So, oh, no, it's okay. It presented itself to me. I didn't really have to look for it. In fact, looking for it probably would have made it not present itself to me.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And like I think as long as you're out there and you want to do the thing, you want to drum, someone's gonna open a door that they need a drummer. But like it's interesting because that same kind of energy that comes from like Nirvana or Dave Grohl or like the punk movement is kind of found in these kind of traditional like bluegrass and like and like Celtic music and folk music. Like there's that same level, like it's in a different tone and in a different placement, but that same energy is there, and it's hearing it for what it is or seeing it for what it is, and that only comes when you really want to do the thing.
Yeah, you have to absolutely love it. There's no other reason to do it. I'm certainly not doing it for the money, although I can't complain. And I have my fiance, Justine. She's a sweetheart, and she supports me 110%. So without the ones I love, and my kids, Ava and Maddie, are so into what I do. It's really support. I have a great support system, which is really what makes it possible for me to do what I do.
For sure. Are they musical?
Yeah, a little bit. Ava is playing the fiddle. She's only 10 years old right now. So she's just starting to learn the fiddle. And Maddie, she's still young. She's only 6. But she's really creative, and she seems to be like sort of the stand-up comedian of the family. So I'm sure that in some way they both got my creative gene. But I think Ava's a little bit more of the dancer, the gymnast, and Maddie's more of the smart aleck.
What about your fiance? Is she musical?
She has great taste in music. However, she can't play. She doesn't play an instrument, but she is a painter, so she's a very creative person as well. But what I love about her the most, well, one of the things I love about her the most is that she's into the music that I never got into. I always wanted to, but never got into. So we sort of have both bases covered between us with musical taste, and she's hilarious because her ear is starting to get tuned in on the things that I hear. So she's like hearing things and making connections in music that she wouldn't have made without watching me do stuff.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to see. Like when you're like, yeah, do you hear that? Do you listen? Play that back. You hear just like the weird like whatever in the track, and then you start to become
Yeah.
aware of that, and like
Yes.
as someone who's around someone who's always aware of that shit, you're like, oh, I
Oh
hear that
yeah.
too, you know, like.
Oh yeah. Well, she got it so much that she actually did something that I was completely in shock and awe of. I was completely surprised that she made the connection between the Beatles' Lady Madonna and Sublime, What I Got. It's the same riff, it's the same song. Rise up in the morning, strap shoes on my feet, light me up that cigarette next, and blah, blah, blah. And then you sing, Lady Madonna, children at your feet. And I was like, I didn't hear that. I don't know how she heard it.
Well, everyone's coming from like a different perspective center, you know, and like everything that we like is either something that is from something else we've been exposed to, or neurologically how how we're solving those cadences or rhythmic closures in our mind, you know, and like
Yeah.
so the things that really resonate are something you already like, like
Yeah. And any drummer will tell you that we all steal from each other.
right, and like oh,
And
how
in the
many
drummers community, it's welcomed. In
yeah.
fact, it's a sign of honor. How many drummers have stolen from John Bonham or Ringo, or Keith Moon? So it's kind of like interesting that sometimes now, after my records come out, I see some other drummers that I'm friends with, and like they're picking up on stuff that I'm doing and like trying to do it, and I'm like, am I influencing that, or are they stealing that from me? Is that?
That's
So
cool
it's really
though.
cool. It's awesome to see. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, like with like, I as a drummer, imagine a lot of the big picture things are what it's taken away. Like, oh, okay, it's a shuffle, it's this. You know what I mean? Like, and so those nuances are what is exciting. It's like finding those
Yeah.
like, well, this is a part of a clave, but also then it go, you know what I mean? Like, or whatever it is, like finding the understanding the big picture of the feel and like finding those subsections or subdivisions that really define the individual player.
Yeah, you said the one correct word there was feel. One thing Butch Norton taught me right off the bat, because I was a chopper, I was doing all the Neil Peart stuff, and he told me it's all about groove and feel, and kind of everything will follow from there. So when you talk about subdivisions and different things going on in clave and stuff like that, that's all really just technical parts of a groove or a
Right, right,
feel
right.
of something.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. When you listen to music, what do you feel? You feel the pulse. That's what makes you move, right?
Yep. Yep.
Everything else is once you're moving, you hear everything else. Once you're in that
Yeah.
groove of it. So like coming from like it's interesting to come from like kind of a rock. I mean, like a rock centered thing, and like wanting just to do it and diving into different cultures, and then like coming out with your solo records. Like with one thing I found interesting with like rhythm changes, um, is there's a track, and I can't remember if it's the first or second track, that you hear a train, a sample of a train, and then you
Oh
start to
yeah.
play along to this train. And then
Yeah.
in Wabi Sabi, there's a track where you hear someone walking, and then you play
Yeah.
off the walking. And I found it really interesting in that way that like you're building off like this kind of like from like a train transportation to the Shoelace Express. You know what I mean? Like this idea of
Yeah.
building
It's
off.
all about the journey. I'm heavily influenced by bands like Pink Floyd and Radiohead, so I'm an album listener. What I mean by that is I listen to the whole album as like a movie. So for me, I wanted to make the listen very much a journey. And it made sense. That was actually me walking. I went out in the field and recorded it, and I had the specific tracks that I wanted to connect together. I was like, oh well, I'll go from Fremont Meadows into a Blessed Unrest, and it kind of, well, first it was like I need to make this transition because a Blessed Unrest was recorded in a separate location, so I wanted, it was going to stick out a little bit audio sonic wise. It was going to be different, so I wanted to sort of make it a departure from the rest of the songs on the album that were recorded in a studio. This one was recorded live, so I wanted to like really take the listener to that specific tent at the festival with the drummers all jamming. So to be able to like connect the sound of walking to like give you the picture in your mind that, yeah, there's a journey here. And with the train, that was completely I don't know I don't know why I did that, but I was just like, I want to have a train on here just because I just thought it'd be interesting, and I'm just looking for new things to do. Like Rhythm Cadence was all about just experimenting and just seeing if I could even get away with it. And Wabi Sabi was sort of like, okay, I can do this. Now what do I got to say? So I really wanted to make it a journey. I hate to cheap out and say it, but I kind of tell people when they want to like know more about it, like what's this record all about? And I just say to them, it's sort of like Drum Side of the Moon, if you could put it that way. Just the idea that there's not necessarily a concept, but there's a journey and a story to be told within the rhythm, you know?
Yeah. Fuck, I've been saying rhythm changes. Like, cause I've been shedding like the rhythm changes every morning. I'm like, fuck, rhythm cadence.
That's okay, man.
Nah, but it like what I found interesting with those two, like those are both rhythms everyone experiences as but modes of like moving, like is a rhythm. Life's in this rhythm. We're constantly moving, and even just like our day to day process is a rhythm, and our year is a rhythm. So to kind of dive into, for you, what's the journey with Wabi Sabi?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's something to do with, I mean, when I picture what I think the story is to me, it could be different to anybody. And I kind of hate to say like what it is to me because I want people to make up their own idea of what it is to them. But I think in a weird way, it sort of signifies society's struggle to be free to be itself. There's a track on there called Ubuntu, which the definition of that term, Ubuntu, is an African term that we all work well together as one. Why separate? So there's a story that a man had a basket of food, and he said, the first person in a circle, like they all stood in a circle around the basket of food. They said the first person to get to the food has all of it for free. So rather than that all of them run, every man for himself, they held arms and all walked towards the food together as one unit, and they could all have the food. So that's the idea of that we all stick together as one. And then it moves into sort of like the second half of the record is darker. And there's a song on there called Age of Descent, where it's kind of like I'm setting it up, the story to be where there's a conflict. And the conflict to me was society being its own worst enemy, especially these days, coming to terms with itself and then sort of coming out on the other side with a deeper understanding of humanity, I guess. I sound like such a sap, but you know, that's kind of what it is to me. I think it's just a reflection of how I see society and how I think it should move into a better place. Which, with the end of the whole album, with A Blessed Unrest, it's kind of like the conclusion, but yet there's still like more to come. So I'm trying to like, you know, really, it's a good question. I'm still really not that good at conceptualizing my song, as you can tell from me talking about it, but it's all a learning process for me right now. And that's what's exciting.
Right. Well, it keeps just that still undefined. It's like undefined keeps it still creative and keeps it still alive. If it's too defined, it has its meaning and that's it. Next
Yeah.
thing, you know. And what I found really interesting with this record, it has this really live feel and there's this real flow to it. And it's not like I don't feel anything's quantized or anything's like a sample
Oh
of
no.
anything. I feel like it's very in the room, very live, and like as part as like what music is now. A lot of it is quantized, and I'm sure
Yeah,
those
and
are great tools. But
exactly. And I am anti quantizing. In fact, my my work ethic for this record, and for all records I do now, is that yeah, okay, you can fix it in the box later, but you're taking the soul out of the performance. So rather than cheat, I'll just do my homework and I'll continue to perform the part until I get it right. No editing and no chopping and no quantizing. And so it's really just putting my nose to the grindstone and doing the homework and doing the work and hashing it out until it's right. And if it's not right, do it over again and learn it, and do my homework. And so, along with Butch Norton's practice regime that he's been working with me on, with doing multiple takes on one song, learning how to play the performance complete all the way through, and really being the responsible drummer. One of my favorite quotes from Jimmy Chamberlain from Smashing Pumpkins is, "There's nothing worse than a drummer that knows how to Pro Tools." And nothing against drummers that do that, but for me, I wanted this to be completely organic. I didn't want to cheat, and I wanted to see what I was capable of. I wanted to push myself.
It definitely with the microtonalism of like the slide hammer dulcimer, like there's so much within this that breathes that creativity and that realism to it, where it's like some of those notes, because of their microtonal, don't sound in tune, like, but and also like kind of with the narrative that you're piecing together to explain this piece, like I think like keeps that message and that purity, and like the fact that it's kind of undefined is the same thing within it. Like, does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
the
it does.
looseness of not being able to move it exactly to the 16th note of the one or whatever, or to shift it up to a C, keeps that always like kind of like something you go back to. That's what, like with this record, I had to listen to it a few times, even kind of like begin to like think about how to like talk about it, like,
Yeah,
which is
yeah. I
cool.
had the same experience when I started listening to Harry Parch.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, the term "wabi sabi," what the title's record or the record's title is, it's a Japanese term, and I learned about this term when I was watching Joe Rogan, and he had David Lee Roth on his
Oh,
podcast.
yeah, with the broken pot, right?
I don't remember that part, but
Okay, I'll let you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh yeah, it was one of David Lee Roth's. I think it was the first interview he did on Joe Rogan. He talked about what wabi sabi is, and he described it as um, that worn pair of jeans that got the hole in it, but they feel and fit just right.
Mm.
So wabi sabi, the term, is a Japanese term that is beauty within the imperfection.
Right.
You
Okay.
know,
Yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
the example I like, because that I listened to that interview and that was a good one. David Lee Roth is incredibly charismatic and charming and
Oh yeah,
hilarious. But also David Lee Roth, like,
yeah. He's the
but
man.
I learned about that term from I forget where it was, but like there used to be this process of wabi sabi where um, individuals would break a bowl, like they would make a bowl, and like it'd be perfect, and they'd break it, and they would put it back together, but the cracks would be melded with gold. So
Oh
now
wow,
the
that's cool.
imperfections are what makes that pot or that cup. I can't remember at the moment which one was, but those
Sure,
imperfections are what brings beauty to it. Wabi sabi.
absolutely. And it's
Um,
the same with everything and with people. The
right.
beauty about a person is not only the great things, but the struggle that they go through in life makes them a good person because of it. And the individual becomes, you celebrate all aspects of what the person or the thing is. And that's where, a lot of creativity comes from that too.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. Like
So to celebrate the cracks in the pot, that's it takes a lot of I don't know what the word is, but I don't see a lot of musicians really celebrating the imperfections. I don't think they're understanding that, there's a lot of happy mistakes that happen too when you're recording.
right.
And that's where a lot of inspiration comes from too. Everybody wants to quantize and everybody wants it to be completely in key. And, there's the formula for a pop song. Everybody wants to race to the top and get it all right now without doing the work and without any creativity, honestly. So, and sort of my way to get back at society was to do something that was not normal. and, uh, and to be creative because, I don't really have any reason to try to, compete in a market with songwriters or anything like that. I'm doing this really for myself. And thankfully, people like you and people that are fans of my music with the Town Pants and other drummers are digging what I do. And so it's encouraging to keep creating.
Yeah. Well, no, definitely. You definitely should. Um, what one? Have you ever dove into Moondog? He was
No, but I've definitely heard a lot.
okay.
I,
Being from
I
New
have to delve
York
into it.
and being into the avant-garde compositionisms, I think you would dig his stuff too.
I think I've heard like one or two songs. He's quite the character, right?
Right, right. He had the
Yeah.
Viking helmet. I think he was
Yeah.
blind and
I got
like
kind of a Captain Beefheart
yeah.
thing out of him, I think, when I looked him up one time. He's an older guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. He looks like a wizard.
Yes. Okay, yeah. We're thinking about the same guy.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's stuff like that that like is celebrated in a different way than other music. And like so much of like how you consume music defines what's going to be like the target to make it, right? And like with
Yeah.
like stuff like Spotify, there's algorithms that take for account the preciseness of like the rhythms, like you know what I mean, like it's
Yeah.
people quantize for a reason, like so much of everything's so perfect, it's so it can almost get heard. And even like
Yeah.
with auto tune, like it's crazy, like the algorithm, how it dissects certain music and puts it in.
Well, I think what you're really getting into, and what's even more on steroids, the point that you're making is the what people have come to call the cicada hi hat.
The cicada hi-hat. Oh,
It's the
yeah. Yeah.
I call it the water sprinkler. So a lot of people were putting that in their music so that the algorithm would pick up, oh, you like those cicada hi-hats, so listen to this song. And
Yeah.
and it really just doesn't do any justice to those that are making their own music that don't have an algorithm that'll pick up on what they're doing. And it's sort of like cheating.
Yeah.
Really, it's weird how people have learned to manipulate things like an algorithm and they create their music for that. And it's discouraging. And I'm not going to preach to anybody on how to make their music. Everybody's got their own way to do things, which is beautiful itself. I just prefer music that is undefinable.
Right. And growing up and like being in these like kind of folk cultures and like folk music culture, like that's the real deal. Like it's
Yeah.
happening right there. When do you hear it? When he comes back. Like
Yeah. I love that.
like,
Yeah, and that's what the definition of folk music is. It's music
Yeah.
of the people.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Ah, that's so cool, man. Like but yeah, it's interesting and like, I think so much of what the bands that do really make a move and really shake things just do their thing forever. Or the artist, we should say. And they do their thing forever and people get hip to it. But forever it's the underdog story. And like and they're even like even though everything is kind of like put together in this way that it's feeding the mill and like so many like artists that do have the cicada like hi-hat and like have these things that get them all these plays, usually those are the guys that don't stick around too long. And
Right.
like and that's the difference. There's the purity of the reservoir of the artist and like how deep they go within that, and like that always cuts through no matter no matter what, and or how long it takes you to find them.
I think it's really the artist's intent.
Yeah.
You know, why are they making this song? Are they making it because they want to get likes? Are they making it because they want to really got something in their soul that they got to express? Or are they making it because they want to make money? There's all different, reasons to want to make music. But to me, I just make music because I love art, and I love organic art. And, I've gone through a lot of different kinds of music and played with a lot of different musicians. And I have never really come across other musicians, except for drummers, that really embrace the idea of of improvisation and just letting this higher power, I don't know if you call it God, I'm not really a religious person, or nature or whatever, but letting the higher power come through you and just channeling that feeling or that spirit and creating something completely new out of thin air. There's not a lot of that going on in other communities, but there's definitely a lot of that in drummers, and the drummers that I look up to are all about that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, even traditionally, you play and there's this or if you look like a drum circle type of mentality, you're playing and you get into a hypnotic kind of mantra of the mind, right? Where you're just whatever it is, and as soon as someone hits something different, it becomes like a ripple effect of, did you hear that? That's cool. How that would, and then you start to react to that. And I think that only comes from the repetitiveness and the being able to focus on that. And I think that was really well said. That was that's cool, man.
Nice. This is a great interview, Zig. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this, man. Before we go, have you heard James Mushler?
That's new to me.
He's a drummer. He's got this record. Remind me, I'll send it to you on I did an interview with him. He was in the band Moon Hooch.
Cool, man.
And he came out with this record, and it's a lot of it's percussion and gongs and shit, and it's the whole concept is the birth of the universe. So it starts off slow, gets chaotic, and then comes back. But
that's awesome. I'd love to check that out.
I think it's right up your alley. But so I'll send that to you via email. But hey, man, thanks for doing this, and thanks for reaching out. This has been really cool. I really dug jumping into your records, and this is a cool talk.
Yeah, man. If people want to find out more about me, I have a website. It's just my name, drums.com. So it's JeffTripoliDrums.com. And for listeners, I'll spell it. It's JeffTripoli, JeffTripoliDrums.com. And I got a whole bunch of stuff up there. I got videos, and people can reach out to me, and hopefully they'll get a little bit of inspiration.
Yeah. Oh, and dude, congrats on the World Drum Club video. That was cool.
Thanks, man.
Kalani
is the best, man. Yeah. I totally didn't expect that. He went above and beyond for me. I love that guy. Really great drummer too. He's got a great YouTube channel.
I go to him all the time for teaching. But anyway, Jeff, thanks so much for talking, man. This has been fun.
Thank you, Zig, man. This has been a great podcast. Thank you so much, man.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.